My husband chose my father's 80th birthday gala in front of 200 of the city's elite to slide divorce papers across the table. He told the crowd I was outdated and introduced his young mistress as the new face of our family legacy. He thought he was stripping me of my dignity, but he forgot one thing. I didn't just build his home. I built the very chair he's sitting on, and I'm about to pull the rug out from under it. Let me tell you how it all began. The Montecito Grand had never looked so beautiful. 300 orchids flown in from Thailand, a 12-piece orchestra playing Sinatra, and enough crystal to fill a swimming pool. I had spent 4 months planning every detail of my father's 80th birthday celebration. The seating chart alone took me 3 weeks because when you're dealing with 200 of California's most powerful people, you don't seat the tech billionaire next to his ex-wife's new husband. I know these things. I've always known these things. That's what made me valuable, and that's exactly what Arthur never understood. My father, Silas Hargrove, sat at the head table in his navy Tom Ford suit, the one I'd picked out because it matched his eyes. 80 years old and still sharper than half the executives in that room. He built Hargrove Chemical from a single patent and a second mortgage on our family home in Pasadena. When I was 6, I used to sit on the floor of his lab and watch him work, and he'd explain every compound to me like I was a graduate student. "Evelyn," he'd say, "the world runs on what people can't see. Molecules, formulas, fine print." I never forgot that, especially the part about fine print. Arthur took the stage around 9 o'clock. I remember because I had just checked my watch, thinking the cake would be coming out soon. He looked magnificent up there, I'll give him that. 6'2", silver at the temples, the kind of man who walks into a room and every head turns. He'd been my husband for 23 years, and even after everything, some foolish part of my heart still quickened when he smiled. He tapped the microphone twice, and the room fell silent the way it always did for Arthur Blackwell. CEO of Aurelius Technologies, the self-made man, the visionary. Except he wasn't self-made, and he certainly wasn't a visionary. But I'm getting ahead of myself. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur said, his voice carrying that rehearsed warmth he'd perfected over 2 decades of shareholder meetings. "We're here tonight to celebrate a remarkable man, Silas Hargrove." The crowd applauded. My father nodded graciously. I felt his hand squeeze mine under the table. "But tonight is also about the future," Arthur continued, and something in his tone shifted. I knew that shift. I'd heard it 1,000 times before board votes, before hostile takeovers, before he fired someone who had given the company 15 years of their life. It was the sound of a man who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. Tonight, I'm announcing the complete restructuring of the Aurelius Legacy Foundation and the future direction of our family's assets. I felt my father's hand tighten on mine. Not in fear. My father has never been afraid of anything in his life, but in recognition. He knew before I did. He always could read a room faster than anyone. Arthur snapped his fingers, and a woman walked out from behind the curtain. She was maybe 32, 33. Dark hair pulled back in a chignon that I recognized as an imitation of how I used to wear mine. A red dress that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. She smiled at the crowd with the confidence of someone who has never once doubted her place in the world, which told me everything I needed to know. She had no idea what she was walking into. Nobody does, when Arthur is involved. Not even me, apparently. "I'd like to introduce Isabella Morrow," Arthur said, gesturing toward her like he was unveiling a new product line. "Isabella will be taking over as director of the Aurelius Legacy Foundation, effective immediately. She brings a fresh perspective, a modern vision, and, let's be honest, the energy that this organization needs to move into the next decade." He paused, letting that word hang in the air like a blade. Energy. As if I were a battery that had run out. As if 23 years of building, nurturing, and protecting this empire was something that simply expired. Then he looked directly at me. And he smiled. Not the charming smile. The other one. The one I'd seen him use on competitors right before he destroyed them. "Evelyn," he said into the microphone, his voice dripping with theatrical compassion. "I think we both know this has been a long time coming." He reached under the podium and pulled out a leather folder, Aurelius branded, of course, because Arthur never missed an opportunity for corporate theater, and he walked it down to our table. He set it in front of me, right next to my untouched champagne glass. "These are the restructuring documents. I've been more than fair. You'll keep your father's house in Pasadena. I'll retain the company, the intellectual property portfolio, the aircraft, and the coastal properties." He leaned down, close enough that I could smell Isabella's perfume on his collar, and whispered just loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Don't make a scene, Evelyn. You're just a housewife now." I sat there, frozen, as the man I loved turned into a stranger. I could feel every eye in the ballroom on me, 200 people holding their breath, waiting to see if Evelyn Blackwell would cry, or scream, or throw her champagne in his face. My father's hand was trembling on mine, not with weakness, but with rage. I squeezed it gently, a signal we'd developed over decades. "I've got this." And I did have it. I just didn't know it yet. Before I tell you my next move, where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment and let me know you're standing with me. To understand what happened next, you need to understand where Arthur and I began. And to understand that, you need to know what I gave up. It was 1999 when I met Arthur Blackwell. I was 26, working double shifts at Cedars-Sinai as a registered nurse in the cardiac unit. My feet were so swollen by the end of every shift that I'd sit in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before I could drive home, just letting the pain subside. I smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion, and my idea of a night out was falling asleep on my couch watching Dateline with a bowl of cereal balanced on my stomach. Arthur was selling medical equipment at the time, portable EKG monitors, nothing fancy. He came to the hospital for a demo, and his machine malfunctioned right in front of the department head. I watched this man, handsome, desperate, sweating through his cheap suit, fumble with wires while his entire career hung in the balance. And I did what I always did. I fixed it. I'd been tinkering with medical devices since I was a teenager in my father's lab. I opened the back panel, found the loose capacitor, and had it running in 3 minutes. The department head ordered 12 units. Arthur looked at me like I'd pulled a rabbit out of a hat. He took me to dinner that night at a taco stand on Fairfax. He couldn't afford anything else, and I didn't care. He told me about his dream, a biotech company that would revolutionize how hospitals monitored patient vitals. His eyes burned with that particular fire that young men have when they believe they can change the world. And I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. We married 6 months later in my father's backyard. Silas paid for everything: the modest reception, the honeymoon in Monterey, and most importantly, the seed money. $87,000. That was everything my father had left after selling his share of Hargrove Chemical when he retired. Every penny he'd saved. Every dividend he'd reinvested. He handed it to Arthur with a handshake and one condition. "This money built my life. Use it to build yours, but remember where the foundation came from." Arthur promised. And for a while, he kept that promise. We set up a lab in our garage in Glendale, a 2-car garage that became the birthplace of Aurelius Technologies. Arthur handled the sales and the schmoozing. I handled everything else. I was still working full-time at the hospital, pulling 12-hour shifts, then coming home and working in that garage until 2 in the morning. I taught myself intellectual property law from textbooks I bought at used bookstores because we couldn't afford a patent attorney. I filed our first 3 patents myself, sitting at the kitchen table at midnight with a sleeping baby in a bassinet beside me. When our daughter was 6 months old, I was in that garage running thermal tests on polymer-coated sensors while she napped in a car seat on the workbench. I was 8 months pregnant with our second child when I completed the breakthrough research on the biosensor coating that would become Aurelius's core technology, patent US 7892341. The patent that generated $400 million in licensing revenue over the next 15 years. But Arthur's name was on the company. Arthur's face was on the website. Arthur shook the hands and took the bows. I didn't mind. That's what people don't understand. I genuinely did not mind. I was raised by a man who believed that the work speaks for itself, that you don't need applause to know your worth. My generation, we didn't need our names and lights. We needed to know that what we built was solid, that it would last, that our children would inherit something real. And for years, I thought that's exactly what we were building. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. Isn't it always a Tuesday? Arthur changed the password on our shared investment account. When I asked about it, he said it was a security upgrade. I accepted that. Then the business trip started. Investor meetings in Miami. Tech conferences in the Bahamas. He started caring about his wardrobe, his haircut, his cologne. He'd never been a cologne man before. One night, I was doing laundry and found a receipt from Cartier in his jacket pocket. I hadn't received any jewelry. But the thing that truly shattered me, the thing that turned my sadness into something far more dangerous, was the memoir. Arthur had been working on a book with a ghostwriter, a vanity project titled Built from Nothing, the Arthur Blackwell Story. I found the manuscript draft on his laptop one evening when I was looking for a spreadsheet. I sat in his home office and read it cover to cover. 240 pages about the rise of Aurelius Technologies. My name appeared exactly 3 times. Once as my supportive wife who kept the home running. Once as a devoted mother. And once in the acknowledgments, sandwiched between his college roommate and his personal trainer. The garage laboratory? His idea. The patents? His genius. The $87,000 from my father? Reimagined as a modest family loan that Arthur quickly repaid through his own ingenuity. He wasn't just leaving me. He was erasing me. He was taking the story of my life, the midnight research sessions, the aching feet, the stacks of patent applications, the sacrifice of my own career, and he was writing me out of it entirely. And then he was going to publish it, with Isabella smiling beside him at the book launch, and the world would believe that Evelyn Blackwell was nothing more than a housewife who got lucky. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not anger, something colder, something more precise. My father used to say that the most dangerous chemical reaction is the one you can't see. Well, Arthur couldn't see what was happening inside me. Nobody could. I want to tell you that I had some dramatic epiphany, some movie moment where I threw the laptop across the room and declared war. But that's not how it happened. Real strength doesn't announce itself. It sits quietly in a dark room and thinks. I didn't confront Arthur about the memoir. I didn't mention the Cartier receipt, or the password change, or the cologne. Instead, I did what I'd been trained to do since I was 6 years old, sitting on the floor of my father's laboratory. I observed. I documented. And I waited. The first thing I discovered was worse than the affair. Arthur had been quietly working with Isabella, who, I now realized, was not just his mistress, but a corporate strategist, to transfer Aurelius's core patents into a shell company registered in Delaware. If he succeeded, the patents that I had invented, researched, and filed would belong to a company that had no legal connection to me or my father's original investment. It was theft. Not the kind you report to the police, the kind that wears a $3,000 suit and calls itself corporate restructuring. I spent 2 weeks gathering evidence. Every night, after Arthur fell asleep, and he always slept soundly, the way only men without conscience do, I would sit at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and a yellow legal pad, photographing documents from his unlocked briefcase. He'd changed the passwords on the investment accounts, but he'd never changed the combination on his briefcase. Why would he? I was just a housewife. Housewives don't read SEC filings at midnight. Housewives don't cross-reference shell company registration dates with suspicious wire transfers. Housewives don't notice that the new Delaware entity, Aurelius Innovations LLC, was incorporated 3 days after Arthur's first investor meeting in the Bahamas. The same trip where, as I now understood, he and Isabella had been planning my erasure over room service champagne. One night, I almost got caught. I was photographing a letter from a patent transfer attorney when I heard Arthur's footsteps on the stairs. My heart nearly stopped. I slid the briefcase closed, tucked my phone into my robe pocket, and by the time he appeared in the kitchen doorway, I was pouring a glass of warm milk, the picture of a sleepless, anxious wife. "Can't sleep?" he asked, barely looking at me. "Just worried about Daddy's party," I said, my voice small and trembling. "I want everything to be perfect." He grunted something about not overthinking it and went back to bed. I stood there in the dark kitchen, my hands shaking so badly the milk sloshed over the rim of the glass, and I realized something that terrified me far more than getting caught. I was good at this. I was good at the deception, the performance, the careful construction of a lie. And I understood, with a clarity that cut like glass, that I had learned it from watching Arthur do it to me for 20 years. There was one more piece of the puzzle I hadn't expected. Helen Park, the longest-serving woman on the Aurelius board, had been quietly reaching out to me through her assistant. Helen and I had been friendly for years in the way that corporate wives and board members sometimes are. Polite lunches, charity events, the occasional honest conversation over wine. But her messages now were different. Careful. Coded. "I've been reviewing some historical documents," she wrote in one email. "I think the founding story deserves a more complete telling." Helen had seen the lab notebooks. She knew whose handwriting filled those pages of equations and test results. She'd known for years, and she was tired of pretending. I drove to Pasadena on a Sunday morning. My father was in his garden, the way he always was on Sundays, pruning his roses with the same precision he once applied to chemical compounds. I sat down across from him on the stone bench my mother had placed there 30 years ago, and I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. The only sound was his pruning shears. Then he stood up, walked into the house, and came back with a dusty manila folder. It was held together with a rubber band so old it crumbled when he touched it. Inside was the original seed money agreement from 1999, the one Arthur had signed at our kitchen table 24 years ago, the night my father handed over his life savings. "Your mother made me add a clause," my father said, his voice steady as bedrock. "She never trusted a man who smiled that much." I read the clause 3 times. Then I read it again. Buried in paragraph 14, subsection C, in language so dense it would put a law student to sleep, was what I would come to think of as the Hargrove clause. Any intellectual property developed using the seed capital, or derived from research funded by that capital, remained tied to the original investor's trust until formally released by a separate, notarized agreement. My mother, God rest her soul, had insisted on it. And Arthur, eager and broke and desperate for that $87,000, had signed without reading the fine print. He forgot about molecules. He forgot about fine print. He forgot about everything my father tried to teach him. I called Margaret Chen that same afternoon. Margaret was my college roommate, a retired intellectual property attorney who had spent 30 years at one of the most prestigious firms in Los Angeles, before retiring to grow lavender in Ojai. She was 71, sharper than a scalpel, and she owed me exactly nothing, which is why I trusted her completely. We met at a diner in Burbank. Not Margaret's usual style, she was more of a Nobu woman, but I needed somewhere that Arthur's people would never think to look. I slid the folder across the table the way Arthur would later slide divorce papers across mine. She read it in silence, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, a cup of black coffee growing cold beside her. "Evelyn," she said finally, looking up at me with an expression I can only describe as delighted menace. "This clause is airtight. It's better than airtight. Your mother was either a legal genius or the most suspicious woman who ever lived." "She was a Hargrove," I said. "We don't trust men who smile too much." Margaret laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from deep in the belly. Then she got serious. Here's what we need to do. Arthur is trying to move the patents into a shell company. If he completes that transfer before we activate this clause, it gets complicated. Not impossible, but messy. We need him to sign something, anything, that acknowledges the original capital structure. If he does that, the clause triggers automatically, and every patent developed under that funding reverts to the Hargrove family trust. He'll never sign something like that voluntarily, I said. Margaret smiled. He will if he doesn't know what he's signing. And that, right there, is where I stopped being a victim and started being a strategist. The next 3 weeks were the longest performance of my life. I went home that night and I became exactly the woman Arthur expected me to be. Broken, confused, pathetic. When he walked in the door, I was sitting at the kitchen island with red eyes and a glass of wine, looking like a woman whose world had just ended. Which, in a way, it had. Just not in the way he thought. "Arthur," I said, my voice cracking perfectly. And I do mean perfectly, because I had practiced in the car. "Can we please just talk about this? I'm not asking you to stay. I know you've made your decision. I paused, took a shaky breath. I just want to make sure Daddy is taken care of. He's 80 years old, Arthur. He gave us everything." Arthur leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. That posture. The one that said, "I'm tolerating you." "Evelyn, the terms are more than generous. You get the Pasadena house. Your father can live there until, well, for as long as he needs to." "I know," I whispered. "You've been so fair." The words tasted like acid, but I swallowed them with a sad little smile. I just thought, maybe, could we add a small provision? Just something that says the original family investment is acknowledged? For Daddy's pride. You know how he is about his legacy. Arthur studied me for a moment. I could see the calculation behind his eyes. The same calculation he used on suppliers and shareholders. Cost-benefit analysis. What does this cost me? Nothing. What does it gain me? A compliant ex-wife who signs without a fight. "Sure, Evelyn. Have your little lawyer draft something. I'll look at it." That phrase, "your little lawyer," almost broke my composure. Margaret Chen had argued intellectual property cases before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. She'd won a patent dispute that made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. But to Arthur, any lawyer associated with me was automatically little. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper and nodded gratefully. Over the next 2 weeks, I performed the role of the defeated wife with the discipline of a woman who had spent decades suppressing her own ambitions. I cooked Arthur's favorite meals. I pressed his shirts. I asked him gentle, pathetic questions about the transition and whether Isabella might need any of the files I'd organized over the years. 23 years of meticulous records that she would never understand. But I offered them up like a servant handing over the silverware. Arthur ate it up. One evening, I overheard him on the phone with Isabella, laughing. "She's practically thanking me for leaving her," he said. "I told you she didn't have it in her. She's not built for this world." Isabella's laughter echoed through the phone speaker, thin and bright and cruel. I stood on the other side of the wall, eyes closed, fists clenched, and I let the rage pass through me like a current. Not yet. Not yet. The most dangerous moment came 3 days before the gala. Arthur found Margaret's business card in the pocket of my cardigan. He held it up between 2 fingers like evidence. "Margaret Chen, Esquire," he read. "Who is this?" My stomach dropped, but my face stayed perfectly blank. "Oh, that's just an old friend from college. I ran into her at the farmer's market. She retired years ago. She grows lavender now." I let out a little self-deprecating laugh. I was actually asking her about pruning techniques for Daddy's garden. Can you imagine? An IP lawyer giving gardening advice. Arthur tossed the card on the counter and walked away. "You and your father and those damn roses," he muttered. I picked up the card with hands that were perfectly steady and slipped it back into my pocket. Inside, my heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. But the mask held. It had to. He didn't look at the document. Of course he didn't. Arthur never read what he signed. That's what he paid people for. But the document Margaret prepared was a masterpiece of legal architecture. On its surface, it appeared to be a simple technology transition acknowledgement, a routine waiver confirming that Evelyn Blackwell relinquished her role in the Aurelius Legacy Foundation and acknowledged Arthur as the sole operational authority. Standard divorce housekeeping. Nothing a busy CEO would blink at. But woven into the legalese like a thread of steel through silk was a single reference to the original Capital Formation Agreement, dated March 15, 1999. By signing the acknowledgement, Arthur was confirming, for the first time in 24 years, that the 1999 agreement was still in full legal force. And that meant the Hargrove clause was alive. The night before my father's gala, I sat alone in the guest bedroom. Arthur had moved me there months ago, and held that document in my hands. The pen felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried, not because I doubted the plan, but because I was about to detonate 23 years of my life. Every memory, every shared sunrise, every moment I'd loved that man, and I had loved him, desperately, for a very long time, was about to become collateral damage. I thought about calling Margaret. I thought about calling my father. Instead, I called my daughter, Caroline, who was 22 and finishing her graduate work at Stanford. I didn't tell her what I was about to do. I just wanted to hear her voice. She talked about her thesis, about a boy she was seeing, about the terrible cafeteria food. Normal things, beautiful things. And when she said, "Love you, Mom. You're the strongest person I know," I knew I was ready. I didn't do this out of hatred. I did it because everything I had built, every patent, every formula, every late night in that garage, was about to be handed to a woman who couldn't tell a biosensor from a bathroom scale. I did it because my father's $87,000 was sacred, and Arthur was treating it like pocket change. I did it because justice isn't something that falls from the sky. Sometimes you have to build it yourself, one clause at a time. Many of you have asked if I should have just taken a settlement and walked away. Do you think a woman should play nice when her life's work is being stolen? Or is it time to fight back? Like this video and comment "Justice" if you want to see Arthur lose it all. Now let me take you back to the gala. Back to that moment with the leather folder and the 200 watching eyes, and my father's trembling hand on mine. Because what Arthur didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that I had my own folder in my handbag. And it was about to change everything. Arthur was still basking. He'd returned to the stage after delivering his little performance, and Isabella was standing beside him like a trophy on a shelf. The crowd was murmuring, some in shock, some in that particular brand of excitement that powerful people feel when they witness someone else's destruction. Arthur raised his champagne glass. "To new beginnings," he said. I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood, smoothed the front of my dress, a vintage Chanel my mother had left me because if you're going to dismantle a man, you might as well look impeccable doing it. And I walked to the stage. Arthur's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Good. He wasn't expecting this. "Arthur," I said, and my voice carried across that ballroom like a bell. "Before we formalize anything, I believe there's one more document that requires your signature. The Technology Transition Acknowledgement. For the board's records." He blinked. Then he laughed. That big boardroom laugh that had charmed investors for 20 years. "Always the perfectionist, Evie." He turned to his board members who were seated at the front tables. "See? This is why she was invaluable," dotting every I. The condescension dripped from every syllable, and I let it. I let him have that last moment of arrogance because I knew what was coming. I handed him the document and a pen. He didn't read it. He signed it with that theatrical flourish of his, the big, swooping A that he'd practiced in mirrors when he was still a nobody selling faulty EKG monitors. He signed it in front of 200 witnesses, 3 board members and one very expensive corporate lawyer, who happened to be sitting at table 12 because I had personally arranged the seating chart. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, taking the document back. And then I smiled. The first real smile I'd allowed myself in months. "You've been very helpful." Something in my tone made him pause. I saw it, the flicker of doubt, the micro-expression of a man who suddenly realizes he might have miscalculated. But he was too deep into his performance to stop. He turned back to the crowd, raised his glass again, and the moment passed. Monday morning arrived like a guillotine. At 8:47 a.m., Arthur walked into the Aurelius Technologies headquarters in Santa Monica and found the lobby security system deactivated. Not malfunctioning, deactivated. His keycard didn't work. The receptionist, a young woman named Dana who had always greeted him with corporate worship, looked at him with an expression he'd never seen directed at himself. Pity. "Mr. Blackwell, the board is meeting in conference room A. They've asked that you—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Wait in the visitor lounge." "The visitor lounge?" Arthur's voice cracked on the second word. "I'm the CEO of this company." "Yes, sir. They're aware." By 10:15 a.m., Arthur's corner office had been locked. By noon, the company's servers had been placed under a security hold pending a full intellectual property audit. By 3 p.m., the news had leaked to the financial press. Aurelius Technologies was undergoing an emergency patent review that called into question the ownership of its entire technology portfolio. Here's what happened, and I want you to understand every beautiful, meticulous detail. The document Arthur signed at the Gala, the Technology Transition Acknowledgement, contained a reference to the 1999 seed capital agreement. By signing it, Arthur legally confirmed that the original investment agreement was still binding. And the original agreement contained the Hargrove clause. All patents developed using the seed capital belonged to the Hargrove family trust until formally released by separate notarized consent. That consent had never been given. In 24 years, nobody had ever asked for it, because nobody remembered it existed. Nobody except my mother, who put it there, and my father, who kept the file, and me, who activated it. Every single core patent held by Aurelius Technologies, 14 patents in total, representing the fundamental technology that powered 93% of the company's revenue, legally belonged to the Hargrove family trust, which meant they belonged to my father, which meant they belonged to me. Arthur's phone calls went unanswered. His emails bounced back. The major investors, Goldman, Sequoia, 3 sovereign wealth funds, immediately froze their positions pending legal review. Within 48 hours, Aurelius's stock price dropped 37%. Within 72 hours, 2 board members resigned. By Thursday, Arthur's personal accounts were frozen as part of the corporate audit, and the shell company in Delaware, the one he and Isabella had been using to siphon the patents, was flagged for investigation. On Tuesday, Arthur tried to hold an emergency all-hands meeting. He walked into the main conference room with his jaw set and his shoulders squared, ready to deliver one of those fiery speeches that had rallied employees through 3 market downturns. But the room was half empty. The engineers, my engineers, the ones who had built their careers on technology I'd invented, sat with their arms crossed and their eyes down. One of them, a senior developer named James, who had been with the company since year 3, stood up and said, "Arthur, is it true that you're not the inventor on any of the core patents?" The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the air conditioning. Arthur opened his mouth, closed it, and walked out. He never held another all-hands meeting. On Wednesday, the Wall Street Journal ran a piece about the patent dispute. They didn't name me, not yet, but they used the phrase founding family claims, and anyone who knew the Aurelius story understood exactly what that meant. Arthur's publicist quit. His personal attorney filed a motion to contest the Hargrove clause. But Margaret had anticipated that. She'd already filed a preemptive brief with supporting documentation that included 23 years of lab notebooks, patent applications in my handwriting, and a notarized copy of the 1999 seed money agreement. The judge denied Arthur's motion in 48 hours. Margaret called me that evening. His lawyer looked like he'd been hit by a bus, she said, with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had spent her career watching men underestimate the wrong people. And Isabella? Sweet, ambitious Isabella, with her chignon and her red dress and her plans to become the next Mrs. Blackwell? She lasted exactly 4 days. On Thursday evening, when Arthur called her from a prepaid phone, his own had been seized by corporate counsel, she didn't pick up. On Friday, he drove to her apartment in West Hollywood and found it empty. She'd taken a position at a rival firm in New York. She left behind a single note on the kitchen counter. "This isn't what I signed up for." 4 days. That's how long loyalty lasts when it's built on someone else's money. I'd be lying if I said that didn't make me feel something. Not joy. It was sadder than joy. Quieter. It was the feeling of watching a house of cards collapse and knowing that you'd built the table it was standing on. Arthur came to my father's house on Friday evening. Not the Montecito Grand. The real house. The Pasadena Craftsman where I grew up, where the hardwood floors still creaked in the same spots they did when I was 8. He didn't knock. He pushed through the front door like he still owned the world, his face red, his tie loosened, his hair, always so perfectly styled, falling across his forehead in damp streaks. "You did this," he said. He wasn't yelling yet, but he was close. "You poisoned the board against me." I was sitting in my father's study. Margaret was beside me, her reading glasses on, a legal pad in her lap. 2 members of the Aurelius Board of Directors, Helen Park and Richard Gutierrez, both of whom had been quietly supporting my father's position for months, sat in the wingback chairs by the fireplace. My father was in his usual spot by the window, looking out at his roses. "Sit down, Arthur," I said. No anger, no triumph. Just the calm, steady voice of a woman who had spent 23 years earning this moment. "I will not sit down. You have no idea what you've done. I've destroyed nothing." I let the silence sit for a moment. "I've restored what was always mine, and my father's. The patents were never yours, Arthur. They were developed using Hargrove capital, researched in a Hargrove-funded laboratory, our garage, in case you've forgotten, and filed by a Hargrove. Me. I am the inventor of record on 11 of the 14 core patents. I wrote the applications. I ran the experiments. I did the work." Arthur's face went through a transformation that I will remember for the rest of my life. Arrogance to confusion, confusion to disbelief, disbelief to panic, and finally, the one I'd been waiting for, panic to the terrible, sinking recognition that he had been outplayed by the woman he had called a housewife. "That's impossible," he whispered. "That agreement, it was nothing. It was a formality. Silas, tell them. It was a handshake deal." My father said nothing. He kept looking at his roses. "The Hargrove clause," Margaret said, standing and handing Arthur a printed copy. "Paragraph 14, subsection C. Signed by you on March 15, 1999. Reconfirmed by you on Saturday evening at the Montecito Grand, in front of 203 witnesses, including corporate counsel. The patents revert to the Hargrove Family Trust. The board has voted unanimously to remove you as CEO pending the completion of the IP audit." Arthur's face drained of color. He gripped the back of the nearest chair like a man trying not to fall. "You can't do this. I built this company from nothing." "From $87,000, I said quietly. "From my father's retirement savings. From my research. From my hands. Nothing about this company came from nothing, Arthur." That was always the lie, wasn't it? The self-made man, who was made by everyone around him. He turned to Helen Park. Helen, you can't possibly. Arthur, Helen said, and her voice carried the particular exhaustion of a woman who had watched a man take credit for another person's work for 2 decades. I've seen the lab notebooks, every single page. I've seen the original patent filings in Evelyn's handwriting. I've compared the technical specifications with the work product that was submitted under your name. Evelyn's name should have been on this company from the beginning. Frankly, I'm ashamed it took me this long to say it out loud. Richard Gutierrez spoke next, his voice measured and deliberate. The board's decision is final, Arthur. We've already retained independent counsel to oversee the transition. Your corporate credit cards have been deactivated. Your access to company systems has been revoked. We'd advise you to retain personal legal representation. Arthur spun back to me, and for the first time in 23 years, I saw something I had never seen in his eyes. Fear. Real animal fear. Evelyn, please, we can work this out. I'll add your name to the patents. I'll cancel the memoir. I'll end things with Isabella, whatever you want. I looked at him, this man I had loved, this man I had given my best years to, this man who 20 minutes ago had been laughing about my simplicity to his mistress, and I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not vengeance, a strange, heavy sadness. Because the man standing in front of me, bargaining with things that were never his to offer, was not the man I had married. That man was gone. Maybe he never existed at all. It's not about what I want, Arthur, I said. It's about what's true. And the truth is that you didn't build Aurelius. I did. My father funded it, my mother protected it, and I created the technology that made it worth protecting. You were the salesman, and you were very good at it. But you confused selling the dream with building it. He turned to my father. Silas was still looking at his roses. He didn't turn around. Silas, please, I built this company. No, my father said, his voice as quiet as falling leaves. You sold it. My daughter built it. Arthur stood there for a long time. The room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock that had belonged to my mother. I watched him cycle through every option, legal threats, emotional appeals, desperate bargaining, and discard each one as he realized they were all empty. He had no patents, he had no board support, he had no investors. And as of 4 days ago, he had no Isabella. He left without another word. The front door closed softly behind him. No slam, no dramatic exit. Just the quiet click of a latch, and 23 years of marriage ending not with a bang, but with the sound of a man walking away from everything he'd stolen. My father finally turned from the window. He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I had been waiting my entire adult life to see. Not pride. My father had always been proud of me, but recognition. The recognition that his daughter was not just strong, but unbreakable. Your mother would have loved this, he said. Mom planned it, I reminded him. The clause was her idea. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. She always was the smartest person in every room. She taught me well. Almost a year has passed since that night. I sit at the head of the Aurelius boardroom now, not as a trophy wife or a symbolic figurehead, but as the chief technology officer and majority patent holder of a company that I built from a garage and a dream. We restructured the board. We settled the IP claims. We hired ethical leadership. The stock price recovered and then some, because it turns out that investors actually prefer companies whose technology is built on legitimate foundations. Arthur is living in a rented apartment in the valley. The memoir was never published. His ghostwriter quit when the advance checks bounced. Last I heard, he was consulting for a startup that sells wellness supplements, which feels like exactly the right kind of cosmic justice for a man who spent 20 years pretending to be a tech genius. I don't hate him. I want you to know that. Hatred is expensive, and I've spent enough of my life investing in Arthur Blackwell. What I feel is something closer to clarity, the sharp, clean clarity that comes after a storm, when the air smells like rain and you can see all the way to the mountains. Every Thursday, I drive to Pasadena and have dinner with my father. We sit in his garden, the same garden where my mother planted roses 40 years ago, and we talk about molecules and fine print, and the things you can't see that hold the world together. Caroline visits on weekends when she can. She started a biotech internship at a company that licenses 2 of our patents, and she told me last week that she wants to file her own someday. From the kitchen table, she said, grinning. Just like you, Mom. My father turns 81 next month. I'm throwing him a party. Nothing grand, just family, close friends, good food, and absolutely no leather folders. He doesn't need 200 people to know his worth. Neither do I. Not anymore. Arthur believed in the American dream of being self-made, but he forgot that the strongest structures are built on a foundation of truth. And my foundation, my father's investment, my mother's foresight, my own 2 hands in a garage at 2 a.m, is unbreakable. I hope my story reminds you that your worth isn't defined by who stays, but by what you've built with your own 2 hands. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to reclaim your power from someone who took you for granted? Please like the video and share your story in the comments. Let's support each other in protecting our legacies.